Hey everyone, Duke here, and today we're making an updated guide to mods in Destiny 2. I get a lot of questions regarding mods as there's almost no information given in-game about them. We're going to go over some of the must-have info, as well as some tips and tricks in deeper detail. First off, you can see all the mods that you have or maybe don't have in your Collections tab under Mods. If you go inside here, you're going to have a bunch of different options to look at the mods that you may have or not have. There's many specific mods that are only for specific armor slots, as you can see, head, arms, chest, legs, and your class item. There's also general mods, which these can go in any armor piece. There's combat style mods, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and there's also raid mods, which we will also talk about in a little bit. There are 4 ways to get mods, the first of which being anytime you get any sort of legendary drop. That can be an umbral engram, just a legendary drop on the ground, a prime engram, turning in any of these engrams, you can potentially get a mod with it. The next way to get mods is going to be from Banshee. He sells 4 mods every single day. These are going to be some more of your basic mods and the mods that you can potentially be getting from legendary engrams. Do note that you will never get a mod that you already have. So if you ever see any mods here from Banshee that you don't have yet, you should definitely pick them up, as that will give you the chance to get new mods when you are turning in legendaries and getting potentially more mods from that as well. The third way to get mods is from Ada at the other side of the tower, and she will also be selling 4 mods every single day, as you can see here. Do note that she will always be selling at least 1 mod that is considered a combat style mod. I believe it's always in this last slot. I'm not 100% sure of that. But these mods specifically, you absolutely want to make sure you definitely buy each day, as this is the only way you can get these mods. There are, I think, 70 some when we looked in collections, combat style mods. If you don't already have these, and if you're just starting out, if you missed them at all, there's 71. And the only way you can get all 71 of these mods is this one singular mod that Ada sells every single day. This is, in my opinion, one of the worst, if not the worst, systems in Destiny. It's unfortunate, but again, if you really want to get into mods, you really want to be looking out for these, picking up as many as you possibly can. And the final way to get mods is going to be the raid mods. These come from each specific raid. So for example, if you're looking for Vault of Glass mods, these are going to come from Vault of Glass. And not only that, but they're also only going to work in the raid that they come from. So again, in this example, this would only work in the Vault of Glass raid. These mods will all specifically come from the secret chests in their given raids. Some of the newer raids are actually guaranteed to give you a raid mod every single time you open those chests each week until you get them all. Unless they changed it, some of the older raids like Last Wish is not guaranteed to give you mods. It's just a random drop from those secret chests. But again, they only come from their specific raid and can only be used in their specific raid. There's one specific mod that this is actually not true for. It's not an armor mod, but it's a weapon mod that is going to be Taken Spec, which does come from the Last Wish raid, as you can see here, and deals additional damage to all taken enemies. But this actually works anywhere there are taken enemies. So you can do a strike, or Gambit especially is really good for, and this will work anywhere in the entire game where you're fighting Taken. Now that we've discussed how to get mods, let's talk about some of the mods and going over slot by slot and which mods you're really going to want to be looking at. Starting off, we have the general armor mod slot. This is going to be the same possible mods for every single armor piece. All 5 of your armor slots are going to have these exact same possible mods to be used. The mods that are going to be in this general armor mod slot are going to be your stat mods, and you're going to have 2 types of stat mods for each stat. You're going to have the +5 version and the +10 version. One is going to be the minor, which is going to be costing you less energy. And if you didn't already know, the entirety of your mod slots can only have a total of 10 energy, and that's if you fully masterwork it. So sometimes if you really want to have some other mods, using the cheaper version that only usually costs 1 or maybe 2 energy, but still gives you some extra stats, can be more beneficial than giving the +10 stat, but it costs more energy. Kind of on that note, remember that for all of your stats, it only matters if you get to the next tier. So for example, with my 76 recovery here, there's no difference between being 71, 72, all the way through 79. If I did have another stat spot to put something in, like if I wasn't already using all of those general armor mod slots, I would only actually need one of those +5 mods to get to 80 recovery, which would give me that extra recovery rate increase. It wouldn't necessarily benefit me at all to use the full recovery mod that gives me +10. So that's where you can kind of see where the +5 mods can potentially be just as useful as the +10 mods. I would recommend using this mod slot to make sure, at least in PvE, that you are always at 100 resilience, or at least as very close as you can possibly get. Resilience is going to be your #1 stat in PvE. As you can see here, if you get to 100 resilience, you're going to have 40% damage reduction from all sources everywhere in the game in PvE. So that is a huge, huge damage decrease. Unless they change this or nerf this down the line, this is the #1 stat you want for every single character at all times in PvE. Outside of that, I usually like to have my discipline pretty high, especially as a warlock. I'd say a titan as well. For hunters specifically, and really only hunters, you're also going to want your mobility to be higher for titans and warlocks. Again, this is specifically for PvE. I wouldn't worry too much about mobility. Recovery is always pretty good on pretty much all characters. You want to have some of this, and on warlocks, it's especially helpful as it does reduce the cooldown of your class ability. Actually, going back to hunters, that's a big reason why you want your mobility to be high, is because for hunters, your mobility is going to be tied to your class cooldown. And for titans, again, you're already on 100 resilience, but titans are lucky. Their ability and their barricade is tied to resilience, so you're going to be in good shape anyway. As for intellect and strength, I'm usually not too worried about them, especially strength. For intellect, they have changed this a while back, where yes, you're still going to have that lower base cooldown on intellect if you get it a little bit higher, and I wouldn't mind getting it to maybe tier 5 or so. You start kind of getting some pretty big diminishing returns past that, but most of your intellect is actually going to come from just being in combat and killing things, or most of your super regen, I should say, should be from being in combat and killing things. And there is actually going to be a mod we talk about later that is going to boost your intellect anyway, so gives another reason to not worry too much about your intellect. The next 2 slots in every single armor piece that you have are going to be specific for that armor piece. So for example, right now we're looking at helmets, and they're going to be different mods depending on what armor you're looking at. We have, for helmets, our main mods that we're looking at are going to be the ammo finder mods. These give you the chance to basically get more ammo, and a higher chance to get more ammo drops for whatever you use. I like to use these quite often. I'm usually going to be using whatever my heavy weapon of choice is, which tends to be linear fusion rifles in the current meta. You want to usually use that as your ammo finder. That's going to give you more chances to get those drops. Do note that in PvP, you're going to be wanting to look at your targeting mods. The ammo finders don't do anything for you in PvP, and the targeting mods are going to help improve that target acquisition and get more of those shots on the target that you want to hit for PvP. Again, in PvE, wouldn't use these. It's pretty much straightforward. PvE, use ammo finders. PvP, use targeting mods. There are going to be some specific mods each season that can potentially be here as well, which are called the artifact mods. We'll kind of talk about those in a little bit as well, but these are going to change season over season, so we're not going to talk too specifically about any of these right now. There's also ways to generate orbs from your helmet using the different siphon mods. Depending on what type of affinity your armor has, you have a different choice to make orbs from. So you can either make your affinity solar, arc, void, or stasis. You can change this at any time as long as you take all the mods off. Make sure you take all the mods off first. It won't let you if you don't. It will cost 10,000 glimmer and 1 upgrade module to change this, and that is going to change which potential way you can get your orbs of power. So for example, on solar, we can make orbs of power by getting rapid solar weapon final blows. If we were on arc, we would need arc weapon final blows, and just etc. from there. Do note that if you are on the same subclass, so if I was running a solar warlock on solar, I could just use harmonic siphon to cost less energy, and it would work the same because it is the damage that is matching my subclass type. There's also a few specific, just kind of what I'd call extra mods. The main one I would recommend looking into as on the helmet is going to be your Ashes to Assets. This is a huge mod, especially for any grenade focused build. As someone that plays a lot of Warlock, anything with like Controverse holds or Sun Bracers is going to be insanely good with this mod. You can stack this, so you can run 2 Ashes to Assets, and this is going to give you more super energy, and it is a significant amount of super energy based on how many grenade kills you get. And again, if you're running Sun Bracers, or you're running Controverse holds as a Warlock, or maybe you're running Heart of Inmost Light as a Titan, or just any grenade focused build, there's other grenade focused builds out there, high discipline. This is a very good mod, and definitely would recommend looking into and testing out, see if you like it. Again, the downside of running double Ashes to Assets is you can no longer run your ammo finders, potentially get a little bit less ammo, but we do have Aeons to Finisher, Champions, and other yellow bars to get guaranteed heavy, especially in raid scenarios where you can even hot swap them. So I think a lot of times now, especially in the meta we're currently in, with Aeons being so strong and Champions being everywhere to be able to easily get ammo from those Champions, I think Ashes to Assets, and probably double Ashes to Assets, is a really, really, really good option. And the final slot we have is the combat style armor mods, which we briefly talked about earlier. I'm going to wait to talk about this slot until the end, but just know it's here. Next we have our arms armor mods. This is usually, again talking about champions, going to be where you're going to want to put your champion mods. Not usually, you have to put them here, unless you are using a exotic that has built-in champion mods, such as Arbalist for anti-barrier. This is where you have to put your champion mods. There's no other options. This is where you're going to put them. There are other mods here as well. Again, if you're doing PvP, you obviously don't really need champion mods. So there are loader mods. These are going to be good in both PvE and PvP. You've also got the dexterity mods, which is going to increase your ready and stow speed. I would recommend to really never run this in PvE. In PvP, it can definitely give you some value, but really not a lot of value in this for PvE. We've also got some ability-focused mods that you can see on your different affinities of arms mods, which we've got fastball, which can be on anywhere, which this is going to increase your grenade throw distance. This is going to make your grenade kind of go much more straight. Is very, very useful, but at the same time, if you use this sometimes and then suddenly don't use it, it is very awkward to switch between the two. So it's good if you have the space for it, but it is a little awkward to sometimes have it and then sometimes not. Next we have chest armor, which we got a couple different options here. Starting off, we have what are the resistance mods, which these are going to be very, very useful. These will stack with resilience in terms of giving you even more than 40% damage reduction. There are multiple different types. We do have a artifact mod specific for this season that combines solar resist and arc resist, but normally, again, you're going to want to have your affinity tuned to whatever resistance you want. As we are currently on void affinity, we can only see the void resistance and use the void resistance. So if you wanted arc resistance, for example, you would need to make sure you were on arc affinity. We also have some specific kind of range resistances. We have melee damage resistance, sniper damage resistance, and then concussive dampener. Basically, melee damage resistance will give you resistance at a very, very close range. Sniper damage resistance will give you resistance from enemies that are much further away. Pretty obvious. And then concussive dampener is going to give you resistances from pretty much anything that's AoE. This is stuff like stomps and fire, which is in a lot of the game. Concussive dampener is a very, very, very useful mod in many, many cases because there's just so much AoE stuff that ends up hitting you. But again, you've got some different options there. On top of that, we do have our reserve mods here, which we will talk about in just a second. Very useful for PvE, pretty much completely useless in PvP. And we do have our unflinching mods as well. Do note that these resistance mods do not work in PvP at all, so pretty much the resistance mods and the reserve mods completely useless in PvP. The only mod you're going to want to be using, or the types of mods you're going to want to be using in PvP, are these unflinching mods, which will reduce flinch when you are taking damage. Now going back to these reserve mods, at least in anything that is not locked loadouts, do note that you can either switch or just have an extra armor piece with linear reserves, linear or whatever reserves you want, not just specifically linear fusion rifle reserves. And if you do go ahead and rally at a raid flag, you will get that extra reserve. So I have 25 total heavy, and I'm actually running double linear fusion, so it's benefiting Arbalist as well. So I've got 22 in Arbalist and 25 in my heavy. Now if I switch to the other chest piece that does not have those reserves, you'll see that I still have the 22 special in Arbalist and 25 heavy. Do note that if you die for whatever reason and have to respawn, so let's just try to die somehow. But once you die, again, assuming you've switched chest pieces, you will lose those reserves. So here as I respawn, you'll see that I now only have 20 in Arbalist and 22 in heavy. And this is what the normal reserves are going to look like if you're not running those double reserves. So basically you're losing out on 3 heavy and 2 special in this case. Not a huge deal, not game breaking and game changing, but if you're doing master type content and you really need to eke out that last little bit of damage, it is helpful. That couple shots, again, and this can work for any type of mod. So like if you were using rockets, for example, you You do the exact same thing and put on rocket reserves, double rocket reserves, whatever else works all the same. One final note about that is do note that obviously that is not doable if you are running anything that has locked loadouts, such as Grandmaster Nightfalls, as you cannot change armor or any mods when you are in the activity. Next we have leg armor mods. This is going to be your holster mods and your scavenger mods. Do note that as of recently, and you can actually see it on here, this mod, all the scavenger mods do not work in Crucible. These are going to be PvE only. And again, as you can also see on here, you cannot stack 2 scavenger mods in any activity. You can only run 1. So for example, if I wanted to run 2 linear fusion rifle scavengers, I can technically do that for the energy cost, but it will not provide any benefit. However, if you wanted to do like a grenade launcher scavenger, if you're running like a special grenade launcher and then a heavy linear, you could run 1 grenade launcher scavenger and 1 linear fusion rifle scavenger, and that does work. Do know that the holster mods do actually stack. However, in PvE, I would always recommend running the scavenger of your heavy slot. It is going to give you more ammo for every single brick that you pick up. This also includes if you do run ammo finder on your helmet. This will include those bricks as well. You will get more ammo from every single brick of that type. And specifically, if you're running kind of a reasonably meta loadout that we have right now with Arbalist, and then a heavy linear fusion of your choice, that's 2 linear fusion rifles, and both of those will benefit from, again, ammo finders that we talked about earlier, the reserves that we just talked about, and the scavenger that we're talking about right now, and you'll get the benefit for both your Arbalist and your heavy linear fusion rifle. Outside of scavenger, if you do have extra energy, the holster mods are useful. Do note that these will not reload for you at all if the weapon is out. It needs to actually be holstered or stowed. It will usually take about 5 seconds. I've tested this in the past. It takes about 5 seconds if you're running 1, and about 3 to 3.5 seconds if you're running 2 to start reloading your mag. It will only reload 1 shot at a time for something like linear fusion rifle. If you're using machine gun, if it's not xenophage, if you're using like a normal machine gun, it will reload about 10% of your mag per 3 seconds or 5 seconds, depending on if you're running 1 or 2 of these. I would really never recommend running 2 holster mods. I guess the only time that would be useful is if you had Artifice Armor, which we briefly hinted at just a minute ago, and you were going to run a holster mod in the Artifice Armor slot, but these boots aren't Artifice, so we can't even look at that. But in 99% of cases, you're going to want to focus on scavenger mod of your choice of heavy, and again, if you have extra space, you can then look at maybe the holster mods as well. The leg armor specific mods based on your affinity are all going to basically have to do with orbs of power and picking up orbs of power. You have Absolution, which will reduce all ability cooldowns when you pick up an orb. You have Better Already, which regenerates your health immediately after picking up an orb. Innervation will reduce your grenade cooldown when you pick up an orb. Insulation reduces your class ability when you pick up an orb. Invigoration reduces your melee cooldown when you pick up an orb. Orbs of Restoration will grant a small amount of energy to your ability with the least energy whenever, again, you pick up an orb. And Recuperation will replenish health every time you pick up an orb. Note that these kind of sound similar, Better Already and Recuperation. Recuperation is basically going to give you like a chunk of your health just instantaneously, and that's it. Versus Better Already will start kind of like the recovery of your health. But do note that if you start taking damage again, I think there's a little bit of a cooldown, but if you start taking damage again, that will then stop that health. So there's kind of both sides, both can be better in different ways. Again, Recuperation gives you that just chunk instantaneously, which can potentially keep you alive, versus Better Already, if you're able to pick it up and then kind of get in cover, you can potentially get all of your health back instead of just a small portion. But as all these mods cost 1 other than Absolution costing 3, again, if you do have any space and a little bit of extra energy to use, all potentially good options. And finally, we have the class item armor mods. And at this point, I feel like it is important to talk about the artifact mods that we get each season. As you can see here, we have this artifact, which has 25 mods, which you're going to get at the start of each season. These do require you to unlock them, basically by getting XP throughout the game. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see when you haven't unlocked all of them, it'll tell you how much XP you need until you get another artifact. And if you look at the bottom here, you can see how many mods that you need to unlock to get to the next row. So like for example, to unlock any of these 5 on this final right row, you're going to have needed to unlock 14 of the other mods first. Again, this artifact will change every season and have new mods every season. There are also some mods that are going to be copies of things that we already have, such as like Sword Scavenger. This exists in the game normally. However, whenever it's in the artifact mods, it will end up costing less. As you can see, it costs 1. Or for this season, machine guns kind of have multiple different mods. So you have Machine Gun Scavenger, which only costs 1 in the artifact, but it costs 5 normally. And you also have Machine Gun Holster somewhere, right here, which also only costs 1. So if you're running something like Xenophage, and as we talked about with the legs just a minute ago, these mods only cost 2 combined, when normally it would cost, I believe, 9 combined, and you'd have like no extra energy or space to really do anything. So taking advantage of the artifact mods each season is really beneficial. The reason I wanted to talk about that during the class item slot is pretty much every season we tend to get most of those artifact mods, or a really good chunk of the artifact mods, as class item specific mods. As you can see, if you look at the artifact specifically, it tells you where you can put the mods. So like all the champion mods only go on arms, or this mod only goes on the helmet. Got a couple helmets. We got, again, class item, arms, class item, a bunch of class items. Sometimes we get a mod that might be on all potential armor pieces, which I don't actually know if we have any this season. We have had them in the past, but I believe this season, every single one of these artifact mods only goes on a specific armor piece. Outside of those constantly changing artifact mods, we also have a bunch of mods that are just always available for those class item slots. We're not going to talk about every single one of these, but a few that I would recommend looking at for different builds. We have Bomber, or potentially even running Double Bomber, as these do stack, will reduce your grenade cooldown when you use your class ability. These are especially good on any grenade-focused builds, and again, if you're running your class with high specific class ability stats, so like for example, Hunters with Mobility, Titans with Resilience, Warlocks with Recovery, this is going to allow your class ability to already be at a very low cooldown, and if you're using it pretty consistently, you're going to get grenade energy back on top of that, which is really, really nice. We also have Utility Kickstart, which whenever your class ability energy is fully expended, you gain class ability energy. Basically, when you use your class ability, you get class ability energy back. This is going to be very, very useful, I feel like, on Hunters specifically, because they are so reliant on their class ability, and the class ability is so useful for them. And it's already a pretty low cooldown if you're running 100 mobility or close to 100 mobility. So running 1 or potentially 2 utility kickstarts is very nice on Hunters. And Special Finisher is a very specific use case mod. I wouldn't just recommend using this all the time or anything, but basically, as long as you have at least 1/3 of your super and you finisher any enemy, you will make special ammo for both you and the rest of your team. As we talked about a little bit earlier, Aeons are going to be super meta for a lot of top-end content, you know, like Master Raids or just raids in general, due to the fact that you can make heavy with Sect of Insight, and these work on any class, whatever your Aeons of choices for Warlock, Hunter, or Titan, all have this same specific Sect of Insight mod, which this will allow anytime you finisher a yellow bar or a champion to make heavy for your fire team, but this does not work for you. And also if you do a finisher on an elite, that will make special for, again, everyone other than you. And this doesn't require your super, which is nice, but the benefit of special finisher specifically is, well, twofold. A, again, it makes you ammo, not just your fire team, and B, can be used on any enemy. Does not matter, you will make special. And the potentially double benefit is if you do finisher a champion or anything that would normally make you heavy with Aeons, you can run Aeons and special finisher and potentially make heavy and special from the same enemy. Again, do note that this is going to take 1/3 of your super. If for some reason you do not have 1/3 super up, it will still allow you to finisher, it just won't take any of your super away and will not make special. So now going back to that 4th mod slot in every armor piece, that is going to be your combat style mods. As we talked about earlier, there are 71 of them that you can get in collections as of the making of this video, and these can only be gotten from Ada. So if you're missing some of these, and I'm sure a lot of people are missing some or many or all of these, start looking at Ada. They will rotate every single day. It is random. Again, it's not a good system. I really hope Bungie changes it sooner rather than later, but we want to start getting some of these mods because these are very, very strong and are very, very helpful towards creating specific builds. As there are 71 of these mods, we are not going to talk about every single one, but I'm going to try to go over kind of some of the specifics of like what you can do with them, and they're kind of split into 3 types of mods. We have the Warmind Cell mods, which basically, if you're using specific weapons, such as Ikelos weapons, you can make Warmind cells, which will then allow you to do specific things. Like, for example, here, if you defeat many targets when you explode a Warmind cell, you will create an Orb of Power. Again, there's a bunch of Warmind cell mods that you can look at. Warmind cells are not nearly as strong as they once were. They've been pretty heavily nerfed, but it is something you can potentially build around. We also have Charge with Light mods. These are going to... There's not really a specific thing that these do. These do a lot of different things, but if you're going to do any sort of Charge with Light build, there are 2 specific mods you kind of want to look at. Basically, you need to somehow become Charge with Light. That is your first goal. So if you look at a mod like this, you have Taking Charge, which allows you to become Charged with Light by picking up an Orb of Power. So if somebody, let's say, drops a Well of Radiance and you go pick up that orb that the Well of Radiance makes, that will allow you to become Charged with Light. Now, what does that Charge with Light do? Again, that doesn't really mean anything to you probably right at this moment, but good example of a very useful mod that you can use a Charge with Light build with is High Energy Fire, which this is going to allow you to, while being Charged with Light, you will gain a bonus to your weapon damage, and if you kill an enemy, you will lose 1 stack of Charge with Light. So, really good way to use this is going to be to basically get Charged with Light and then damage something that is not easy to kill, something like a champion, something like a boss. Do note that High Energy Fire does not stack with a lot of the things we use for like boss DPS though, such as like a Weapons of Light or a Well of Radiance. Pretty much any of those types of damage buffs, High Energy Fire will not stack with. However, if either A, you're not running any of those things, like let's say you're trying to do an all arc run of a raid for the Triumph, or a lot of times on Rolk, especially when Rolk first came out, now you can kind of still use Well, but you wouldn't actually use a Weller bubble because he would just end up popping it pretty much right away. So if you don't have the ability to have one of those weapon buffs, and you're not going to actually be killing anything, like you're just going to be doing straight boss DPS, this is super duper useful. Or again, if you just have Taking Charge and potentially another Charge with Light mod, which we'll talk about here in a second, and can get Charge with Light consistently, then you're just getting that Charge with Light pretty consistently, and you're able to keep up that weapon damage even if you are getting kills. So High Energy Fire is very, very useful. What I'd consider the other easiest way to become Charged with Light in pretty much all scenarios is Elemental Charge, which this will allow you to become Charged with Light by picking up an Elemental Well, which this will also transition us into the 3rd type of combat style mods, which are Elemental Wells, which we'll talk about in a second. Do note that if you pick up an Elemental Well that matches your subclass element, so like if it's a Solar Elemental Well and you're on Solar, you'll actually get 2 stacks of Charge with Light. So if you go back to the High Energy Fire, basically that will give you those 2 stacks, which allows you to get 2 kills before you actually no longer have Charge with Light anymore. Also note that at least for the baseline of Charge with Light, you can only have a maximum of 2 stacks at once. There are 2 mods that actually allow you to go higher than this in case you are interested in the Charge with Light builds. They are Charged Up, which will allow for 1 additional stack of Charge with Light, and this does stack, so you can go and potentially use 3 of these and go up to 5. 5 is the max. However, if you want to go up to 5, I would recommend using 1 Charged Up, which will give you up to that 3rd stack, and then Supercharged will give you 2 stacks of Charge with Light up to a maximum of 5. So basically you have that 2 base, you use 1 Supercharged mod to get to 4, and then you would use 1 Charged Up mod to get to the maximum of 5. Before we talk about Elemental Wells, the last Charge with Light mod I really want to talk about, because this is very, very useful, especially for hunters, is Powerful Friends. This has a 2-fold purpose. First, if you become Charged with Light, anyone that is not Charged with Light that is near you is going to become Charged with Light. So this is very useful if your kind of whole team is using Charged with Light builds, or multiple of you guys are using Charged with Light builds, going to be beneficial. However, the bigger benefit in most cases, or like the really main reason you want to use this in most cases, especially as a hunter, is as you can see, you get plus 20 mobility as long as your secondary perk is active. If you look at the bottom here, basically whatever piece you put this on, so if we can find a arc armor piece anywhere, hopefully, that would be wonderful. There we go, we got a class item. Any piece you put on Powerful Friends, which is going to be right here, as you can see right now, it's grayed out. It's not giving me that mobility. But if I put on any arc armor mod, so for example, let's just throw on outreach, that is going to then activate that 20 mobility. As you can see on the bottom right, that's boosted my mobility to 42. It gives me that 20 mobility. So a lot of times you will need this to be on an arc affinity armor piece, again, as we kind of mentioned, because that's the only way you'll even see the powerful friends. And you do need to run an arc armor mod in that specific armor piece. The other option that you have is you can actually run another arc charged with light mod somewhere else. So if I had another arc armor mod on me, I could do it. Actually, I can do it with this. So like this Crown of Tempest is on arc. If I was running, and you can't stack this, as you see. If I try to have two powerful friends on, it just turns them both off. But if I was running, let's say, you can actually do Radiant Light and get that 20 strength as well. You have the 20 strength, and I need to actually put on this too. Then now I got 20 strength and 20 mobility, and even if I take this off, this will still be activated because I have two different arc charged with light mods on two different armor pieces. Again, I got the Radiant Light here, and I got the Powerful Friends here. So you got the two options. Either A, have another armor mod, another arc armor mod on that same piece, or B, have another arc charged with light mod somewhere else in your build. And as we've hinted at a couple times now, we have the elemental well mods as the last type of combat style mods. There's a bunch of these, and basically these do a couple of things. For example, elemental armaments. Anytime you kill an enemy with a damage type that matches your subclass element, you have a chance to spawn an elemental well. So you have your elemental well spawners, or maybe a more specifically easier one, especially going back to grenade focus builds because I like them so much. You have elemental ordnance, where just defeating an enemy, any enemy with a grenade will spawn an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type. So if you're on Void with Controverse Holds again, for example, that will make you a Void elemental well if you get a grenade kill. So the first thing this does, even if it was the only elemental well mod that you ran in your entire build, is that you're going to get ability energy. Now it's specific. If you pick up an elemental well mod that matches your subclass type, again, like Void on Void, you would get energy for all of your abilities. If you pick up a elemental well that is not the same as your subclass type, like if you picked up a solar elemental well while you're on Void, that would give you only ability to your lowest current ability energy. But either way, very useful. And do note that these like work for your teammates and stuff. So like if somebody else is running elemental wells and they're making like solar wells and you're making void wells, like pick them all up. That's going to give everybody, and they're not just specific to you. Like you can see your own, they can see their own. So everybody can pick up one elemental well mod. Like if you make one elemental well from this elemental ordnance mod, everyone on your team can pick up that same elemental well. They do only last a limited amount of time. There's a way to make them last longer if you want. That is actually one specific elemental well mod that is going to be enduring wells. This will increase the lifespan, and most of these mods that are elemental wells can stack. Not all of them, but most, and most of them will like tell you if they can stack. Anything that has to do with time though, for example. So an example of a kind of time-specific mod is going to be Font of Might. This is going to allow you to have a bonus to your weapon damage of a specific damage type. So let's break this down a little bit. If you, let's say you made a Void Elemental Well that you picked up and you're on a Void subclass, right? Again, that would work really well with Elemental Ordnance. If you're on Void, throw a grenade, get a Void Elemental Well. That is then going to allow anything that is that same elemental damage type, which in this case is Void, to give you bonus weapon damage. Now, do note that this does stack, unlike High Energy Fire from earlier. Font of Might does stack with pretty much everything. So like if you're running a Well of Radiance or you're running a Weapons of Light, Font of Might will stack on top of that. So Font of Might is really, really useful. Anytime you can get that to fit in your build, it's going to just give you more damage. Now going back to being able to stack Font of Might, you will need to run Elemental Time Dilation, which is going to basically allow you to run multiple Font of Mights to increase how long it will last. And again, there's multiple mods that work like this, but as you can see here, any elemental well mods that give you time-limited benefits will have the ability to stack, and again, like I said, give you the ability to run more of them and have them last longer. It does not make it do more, like it's not like Font of Might now suddenly is going to do twice as much as it did before. It just makes it last longer. Same idea as Font of Wisdom, which we kind of very briefly hinted at earlier. This is going to give your ability to get your super back, this actually boosts your intellect to 100. So as we were talking about earlier, intellect's like 10, whatever. If you're running Font of Wisdom, if you pick up an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type, that's going to give your intellect boosted up to 100 for the length of Font of Wisdom. Again, depending on how many you're running. If you are running elemental time dilation, it will last even longer. But elemental ordnance with mods like these, very, very useful. There's really just so many good elemental well mods, it's hard not to talk about most or all of them, but a couple more to look at. Explosive Wellmaker, this is going to make you specifically solar elemental wells whenever you get a kill with explosive damage. A grenade counts for this, rockets count for this, most grenade launchers, if not all grenade launchers, will count for this. Like, pretty much anything explosive at all, anything you would think of as even remotely explosive will count for this. So Explosive Wellmaker is really good. You can even run Elemental Ordnance and Explosive Wellmaker to make 2 Elemental Wells when getting grenade kills and stuff like that. So, really good option. Reaping Wellmaker is really, really good if you're going to be using your class ability a lot. Again, especially on Hunter, where their class ability has such a low cooldown. But even Titan, for running that 100 Resilience, your ability is going to be a low cooldown. If you're a Warlock, you're running high recovery, you're going to have low cooldown as well, so Reaping Wellmaker is really useful. Again, this does specifically make Void Elemental Wells, so keep that in mind. Like, if you don't really want Void Elemental Wells for some reason, then, maybe you don't run this one, maybe you run Elemental Ordnance if you're not on Void. But if you're already on Void, and, you're already running Elemental Ordnance and running, that grenade focus build, then maybe you can also run Reaping Wellmaker and just get even more Void Elemental Wells. Melee Wellmaker is, like, super nutty on Solar Titan with the little bonk hammer. Every single time you kill a enemy with your bonk hammer and pick it up, and then kill another enemy with your bonk hammer and pick it up, like, that will work for every single one. You'll be making just a million solar wells with that. I would highly, 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 highly recommend using this if you are running bonky Solar Titan. For most other things, like, if you're not running a melee focus build, I would not recommend this, but Solar Titan with the bonk hammer or any other specific melee focus build, very, very good. Anything solar, this is a very useful mod, Well of Life. This is going to allow you to basically get regeneration for about 10 seconds whenever you pick up a solar elemental well. So if you're making solar elemental wells with Melee Wellmaker, very, very good with Well of Life. Or if you're running elemental ordnance on like a solar build, like Sunbracers or something, Well of Life, insanely good. But basically, anytime you're making any amount of solar elemental wells, or even if your team is just going to be making solar elemental wells, very, very useful. And Well of Tenacity is also really useful. This is going to give you a 50% damage reduction anytime you pick up a Void Elemental Well. It's not quite as good as Protective Light used to be, because you do need to specifically kind of time when you're picking up that Void Elemental Well. It's a little bit awkward. Honestly, I'm not even personally running it just because we already have 40% damage resistance from 100 Resilience, and we already have the damage reduction mods on our chest piece. Like, this seems like overkill to me in most cases, but like if you are really underleveled for something, or just making like a ton of Void Elemental Wells, or just really want to be safe, it's strong. It's a very good option. It's very strong. But again, at the same time, I think there's other options that can be maybe a little bit more aggressive. And we also have Bountiful Wells, so another way to kind of stack some mods. This is going to allow for any Elemental Well mods that allow you to spawn Elemental Wells to stack, which again, kind of like Elemental Time Dilation, you kind of just need to throw this mod in and then like run multiple of whatever mod you're using to get more and more of them. But do note that both of these mods, Elemental Time Dilation itself and Bountiful Wells itself, will count as extras. So like just running Elemental Time Dilation with Font of Might, for example, increases the damage bonus that you get from Font of Might. Same idea with Bountiful Wells. And at this point, I feel like I'm talking about almost every mod, but this is the last one we're going to talk about. Supreme Wellmaker is extremely, extremely useful at kind of the top end DPS, where basically the TLDR of this mod, that you're really the only time you're going to really worry about using it, is if you are a Well Warlock or maybe a Void Titan that's popping a bubble, but it's really, really easy and useful on Well Warlock specifically, where you run this mod, Supreme Wellmaker, that will then allow your well, when you pop it, to spawn 3 Stasis Elemental Wells. Pretty much everybody else on the team, at that point, you would want to run Stasis subclass with Reed's Regret. So basically, Reed's Regret is the Trials version of Type-In, but Stasis. And because of that, since everybody's on the Stasis subclass, and everybody is going to be getting that stasis elemental well. And if you're following along, you may see where this is going. You then can run everybody else that is not the well warlock, because again, that's not going to help them, can run Font of Might, and that's going to, again, they're on stasis, so stasis. They're picking up a stasis elemental well that the well person is making with Supreme Wellmaker, and they're using a stasis weapon in Reed's Regret to get Font of Might to stack and be able to give that damage buff. And again, if you run 4 Font of Mights and an elemental time dilation, that is going to stack it to its maximum time of, I believe, 30 seconds total, and you will just get 30 seconds of an increased damage buff for everybody other than the well person. So really, really strong. I kind of still need to farm a Reed's Regret from Trials this season before it goes away next season, just to really have that at least option in my back pocket. It's not really required in any setting in this game, but it's really, really nice. It's really, really useful. It's going to be that top DPS option. And the last thing that I want to briefly touch on is Artifice Armor, as we kind of hinted at earlier. Any Artifice Armor, basically what this means is this is going to give you a 5th slot on your armor piece. Not like Raid Armor. Raid Armor also has a 5th slot in your armor piece, but that's for raid-specific mods. Artifice Armor gives you that bonus armor mod slot that allows you to equip artifact armor mods from the current season, as you can see here. So any artifact mod that is specific for that armor piece, so we're looking at a class item here, so this is only going to show the class item artifact mods, or for example, we also have a chest piece. This is only going to show any chest piece artifact mods from the season, but this gives you another slot to use basically another mod, as long as you have energy. It does not give you any extra energy, so you're still capped at 10, but if you can fit it in, it gives you another armor mod slot to do even more things. The only consistent way to get Artifice Armor at the moment is in the Duality Dungeon, specifically on Master Mode. As you can see here, the rewards is Artifice Armor. This is infinitely farmable. Every single encounter, as much as you run it for that given week, can give you an Artifice Armor drop. If you get armor, it will be Artifice, and you can have that extra slot. Do note that this may change in a couple weeks here when we get the new dungeon in the next season. Because in the past, the only other dungeon that you can potentially get Artifice Armor from is the Grasp of Avarice dungeon. However, this is only available when it is the current week, because you cannot even run Master unless it is that current week for Grasp of Avarice. So as you can see here, this is only the normal mode. Only every 5 weeks at the moment, you'll be able to run Master Mode on Grasp of Avarice to get that Artifice Armor. And I would assume if things are the same going into the future, that will also be how it works for the Duality Dungeon, where this will become a part of the rotation, and the Master Mode will only be available when it is its current week. And whatever the new dungeon is, will be the only one that is always available for Master and always available for Artifice Armor. But that could change. At the moment, your only guaranteed way, no matter when you're watching this or when you want to run it, to get Artifice Armor is going to be your Duality Dungeon on Master. And that's all for today. I really hope this complete breakdown of mods and kind of some tips and tricks was helpful. I know it was a long video. If you made it to the end, really appreciate you. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.